Welcome to another, there I am. Welcome to another episode of the Aquarium's Online Academy. My name is Luke. I'm one of the educators here at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And I want to wish everybody a happy Earth Day. We are all celebrating Earth Day here at the Aquarium today. And I encourage everyone to celebrate at home, too. In fact, you can spread the word about Earth Day with everyone being, thinking about a lot of things right now because it's a rough time in the world. It's nice to kind of take a moment to just think about our planet and all the wonderful things that it does for us and how much we need it. So if you want to spread the word about earthquake, there was an earthquake, wasn't there, today? Yeah, there was. Very small one, I heard. All right, if you want to spread the word about Earth Day, though, you can check out this lovely drawing that one of our staff just completed. You can draw a picture of the Earth with a heart and post it to social media. If you tag the Aquarium, we'd love to see what you drew. We just want to spread this message. So you want to draw you can draw the Earth with hearts around it, or draw the Earth with a heart on it, or draw the Earth inside of a heart. I mean, there's all sorts of options. But if you tag us, we'd love to see what your Earth Day art looks like. Spread the word about that, and also take today to think about things that maybe we can do, even from home, to just help our planet and show our appreciation for all the wonderful things that it does. If you're wondering for some ideas on what you can do to take action for the Earth while you're at home, go ahead and check out @Teen Climate Council on Instagram. Again, that's @Teen Climate Council. They have a whole bunch of really inspiring and interesting ideas on there. So they're definitely worth checking out. And those are fun activities, not just for teens, but for all ages, actually. Again, that's @Teen Climate Council. So now we can move ahead with our regularly scheduled programming. Today, we are going to be learning about invertebrates. I think this is a really interesting subject to talk about. As I've mentioned before, invertebrates is kind of a weird category because normally we, put things into groups based on stuff they have, right? So, like you say, vertebrates, for example, like us, we're a vertebrate. That makes sense as a group because all vertebrates have something in common. They all have vertebra. That's the spinal column, the backbone, and the little bones or cartilage of your shark that makes it up. But when we talk about the invertebrates, there's not really any one thing that makes all the vertebrates similar to each other. In fact, they really don't have anything in common except for the ones that are in specific groups of their own. So what I'm going to be talking about today, rather than talking about just invertebrates as this sort of random group of animals that just aren't vertebrates, I'm going to be talking about the things that make those different groups of invertebrates specific and special. So here at the Aquarium, there are several different groups of invertebrates that we regularly talk about. And I'm going to be going through those today, both with some live footage from the aquarium, some stuff that we've taken over the years, and we'll be getting a really close look at a lot of different kinds of invertebrates. Now, just as with all of our other programs, if you're interested in sending us a question during the show, you can just text us right here at 562-286-1838. Again, that's 562-286-1838. And what am I trying to say? When you're texting, of course, regular texting fees and all that apply. Make sure to get your parents' permission. But if you want to text us a question, give us your name or even where you're texting us from, your school or your hometown or anything like that. We'd be happy to give you a shout out on the air. And let's see what questions we get. So anyway, let's proceed to talk about invertebrates a little bit. Now, we've seen a couple of different animals swinging by here behind me. One animal I've seen swimming by is definitely a vertebrate like us, right? And that's the fish. I mentioned, to be a vertebrate, all you need to have, right, is that spinal column. And for most vertebrates, that means a backbone. And things like sharks and stingrays, that backbone isn't actually bone, it's made out of cartilage. But still, having that spinal column is what makes you a vertebrate, right? Now, if we look at the animals here, what, if anything, do they have in common with each other? Well, some of them have a lot in common with each other, right? Because there's a lot of sea stars in the image here. I can see quite a few sea stars. But what about the anemones? Do the anemones have anything in common with the sea stars? And the anemones, of course, are these tentacle-y things here. The anemones and the sea stars don't really have much in common. They are very, very different from each other because they're actually from two different groups. They are from different phyla, or different phylums. And these two different groups they're from, and the phylum is like a really big group of animals. Vertebrates is one example of a phylum, or chordates actually. And then there's another phylum that the sea stars belong to. That phylum's called the Echinoderms. We're going to learn about what makes you an echinoderm in a minute. Also, there's another phylum, another group that the anemones belong to, and that group is called the Cnidarians. So we're going to learn what makes these groups special and specific and what animals are members of those groups. And once you understand this, you don't have to talk about vertebrates versus invertebrates anymore. You can just realize that vertebrates are just one example of one of these big groups of animals that have a lot in common. So let's start maybe by talking about sea stars. Let's look at some other sea star pictures here. What else we got as far as sea stars go? Now, if you think about a sea star, what do all sea stars have in common? I mean, we can look just at these ones here. There's a few different kinds in this picture. There's a, here we go, here's some bat stars. The other ones we were just looking at were ochre and leather stars. And, of course, the most common thing that people notice about the sea star, right, is that sea stars have got 5 arms. But not all sea stars have 5 arms, and not all of their cousins in their group do either. Because there are other members of the group that sea stars belong to that actually don't have arms even at all. Another cousin of a sea star would be, say, a sea urchin, for example. If you've not seen a sea urchin before, you know, those little spiky balls. I bet Stewie, who's running the show, will be, here we go. Bring us a picture of one here. This sea urchin here is actually a very, very distant relative of a sea star. They're part of the same phylum. They're part of this big group of animals, and the phylum that they belong to is called the Echinoderms, or Echinoderms. People are always giving me trouble about which way it's pronounced, so I just go with both. So, now, the echinoderms include things like sea urchins, things like sea stars, and also another group of weird little animals called the sea cucumbers, which if you've ever been to our touch pools, you've probably encountered one of them before. But when you look at those 3 animals, right, it's hard to see what they really have in common. They have a lot of things that are very different about them. An urchin and a sea star don't look much alike. A sea cucumber doesn't look anything like either one of them, at least not on first glance, right? I guess he does have some spikes, but those are really soft. So what are the defining features that are at least easy for us to see from the outside that make all these animals part of the same group? Well, in the case of the echinoderms, the easiest one is to look at their feet. All echinoderms have something that's unique to them called tube feet. Tube feet are these weird little kind of sucking straws that you see on the bottom of a sea star. I wonder if Stewie can find a picture of tube feet. We'll see if we can pull it off. But if I bring a sea star up on the document camera, I can maybe show you where they would be in one, though. So if we look, let me bring up my camera here real quick. So if we look at the top of a sea star, this is a little sea star we have here, and this one is a sea star that was deceased long, long ago. This thing might be older than me for all I know. On the top here, you see, you know, this sort of smooth body. This is that kind of way this species of sea star looks. On the bottom, you see these grooves? Look a little gross here. Now, when sea stars are alive, they, and also their cousins, the sea urchins, and the sea cucumbers, again, all members of that same group called the echinoderms, have these things called tube feet. Again, these tube feet are basically these long straws. They've got hundreds of them, and they stick out of these grooves. These grooves have these tube feet that come up out of them, and those grooves and those tube feet that come out of them are what allow the sea star or the urchin or the sea cucumber to move around in its environment and manipulate stuff. Basically, oh, and here's a great picture of a whole bunch of tube feet on the bottom of a sunflower star. So all those they basically are really like little bendy straws. And as the sea stars move along, right, they can suck water into the tube feet to pull themselves and suck themselves onto surfaces, and that's really the easiest way to, from the outside, know you're looking for in an echinoderm. If you see tube feet, you're looking at a member of the family that includes urchins, sea cucumbers, and sea stars. And then there's also some weird ones in there like basket stars and stuff like that too. So that's one of the invertebrate groups that we'll talk about today, and it's a really common one to see in the ocean. Kind of interesting thing about the echinoderms, though, there aren't any that have learned how to live on land. There's no echinoderms that live on the land or live in the air at all. They are 100%, and not even in fresh water, so far as I know. They're ocean animals, pretty much exclusively. Some of them might live in some brackish water, but that's about it. So let's look now at another group of invertebrates, and this is a group that actually does have representatives on land. So you remember I've talked about vertebrates like ourselves, right? Vertebrates include birds, fish, mammals, and so on, reptiles. And we've managed to colonize both land and the water. But a lot of invertebrates haven't. The next invertebrate, though, has, and that, of course, is the group called the arthropods. So arthropods are another phylum of invertebrates. And the arthropods can be all sorts of different things. Arthropods can be things like this guy. What is this, a squat lobster here? He's not actually a lobster, I don't think. Is he actually a lobster? I don't actually know. One of the things confusing about arthropods is a lot of them have names that are not actually correct. So this is a species of crab here moving along here. I love this video. He's like, look at his little mouth. He's like, those are his mouth parts, mandibles and stuff. So if we look at arthropods, arthropods can be anything from a crab to a spider to an ant to a roly-poly to a lobster. And the identifying feature that makes all these animals similar, in the case of the arthropods, is that they have these exoskeletons. And their name actually means jointed feet or jointed legs. And you can see those joints when you look, say, at a giant spider crab like this one. So you see all those, I'm walking off screen, I'm not even blocking him. And this is this giant spider crab here. Look and see all those joints? So a crazy thing about the arthropods, kind of the easy identifying feature to remember about them, is that all the arthropods have this exoskeleton, so it's pretty easy to spot an arthropod and to know an arthropod when you see one. But what's even crazier is that because that hard skeleton is the outermost part of their body and all the soft stuff is underneath it, arthropods all have to molt in order to grow. So this giant spider crab, believe it or not, every once in a while pops open the back of his shell and climbs out of it, climbs out of the entire exoskeleton, leaves the whole thing behind, and then over a period of a few hours, actually it takes a few weeks for it to fully solidify, basically hardens a new exoskeleton on his body. And this thing is something that all arthropods have to do. And you remember we were looking at that crab with all the mouth parts and everything? All that stuff comes with him. Even the tiniest parts, their antenna, their eyes, all that stuff gets pulled out of that exoskeleton because it's all soft and flexible underneath. So this is a really, really cool adaptation the arthropods have. Ooh, and we have a video of a molt in progress. Let's have a look at this. And I'm starting to get some questions too. So while we watch the molt, I'll take some of these questions. Let's see here. Kartik just asked a question, are fish invertebrates? So fish are, oh, this is great. So fish are vertebrates, just like us. So they have a backbone or a spinal column, so fish are vertebrates. Good question, Kartik. And, ooh, so here's a spider crab. So this is the front of its body. This is the opening I told you about. They pop up kind of in the back end there. It's more, and then they gradually work themselves out. Now this video has already been sped up by several times, so this process probably took an hour or more. 40 minutes or so it took. So it took about 40 minutes for this crab to do this, the stuff we're seeing in the video. Look at this. So all this stuff you're seeing coming out, this is really interesting, right? Kind of gross, but really interesting. All this coming out of the back of this crab, that's all soft. You can actually even see as he pulls his legs out here, the leg bending there. Because underneath the exoskeleton, it's totally soft. And so the crab's pulling out all of its muscles, all of its organs, all of the other tissues of its body. It's only leaving the shell behind. And then it is eventually going to pull out, and it kind of puffs itself up with water so it gets real fat for a while. And the new shell hardens on that. And then it kind of lets all the water out so then it has room to grow inside the shell. And that's something that all the arthropods do. Now, there's one other group of invertebrates that we talk about a lot here at the aquarium. And this group includes a lot of slimy, weird, and sometimes very surprising and interesting creatures. This group's called the... Oh, wait, there's two groups of invertebrates. I forgot. All right. Well, this group has some weird and interesting creatures, too. This group's the Cnidarians. So, the Cnidarian phylum is another one of these big groups of invertebrates. And just like the Echinoderms did and just like the arthropods did, the Cnidarians have certain characteristics that they all share. Now, examples of Cnidarians include things like sea jellies, this anemone here behind me, and also corals. Coral reefs are Cnidarians too. They don't look very similar to sea jellies when you look at them at distance, but these coral reef structures here are built by these teeny tiny little polyps that actually grow the reef themselves. And if you look at them up really, really close, they actually do look a lot like anemones. There's just thousands of them on any individual piece of reef. So even things as big as this brain coral, which can be like 10, 15, 20 feet across or something like that, brain corals get enormous, is covered in all these teeny tiny little tentacled animals that build this thing together. And again, the corals are just one of the Cnidarians. The other Cnidarians are things like jellies, things like anemones. Now, what do all the Cnidarians have in common? Well, you've heard me mention tentacles a lot, and indeed they do have tentacles. But the tentacles come in a lot of different shapes and numbers depending on the kind of Cnidarian you're looking at. So the easiest thing that well, actually, and it's tough because it's actually not something you can really see. But the thing that all Cnidarians have in common, that's probably the easiest thing to remember, is that they all have a very special kind of stinging cell. All the Cnidarians have these stinging cells called cnidocytes or nematocysts. And basically, how this works is when you touch, say, the tentacles of a jellyfish, there's these little teeny little things that almost like hairs that stick out of the skin. They're so small that they're microscopic, and they cover the entire tentacle. And when you bump into those things, that little hair gets pushed down. And there's a little barb kind of curled up inside underneath that pops up out of the skin and shoots into you. And in many species, it injects a venom. And this is how the Cnidarians catch their food. Some Cnidarians just have a venom that kind of itches, others it kind of stings, and some it's actually very, very dangerous. But there's also some that don't hurt humans at all, like, for example, the moon jelly, which is one that does catch a lot of small plankton with their stinging cells, but when humans touch them, we can't even feel their stinging cells. This is why we've had touch pools here for a long time at the aquarium where you can touch moon jellies. And watch them go here. Now, a few other things about the Cnidarians. They've got these stinging cells, and that's kind of one of the main unifying characteristics of the whole group. But Cnidarians are also interesting for all the things they don't have. Cnidarians don't have brains. They don't got hearts. They have hardly any internal organs really at all. In fact, well, in the case of the jellies here, I wouldn't even say, it's hard to say they even have an internal anything. They basically just have the necessary stuff to catch food, those stinging cells and those tentacles. They have stomachs, which in the case of the jellies are located around those rings in the center. And they have a reproductive system. And that's it. That's all the Cnidarians really have and need. The jellies just, they have the little bell that twitches, and that's about all they got going. They're one of the simplest animals that you can actually see anywhere in the world. And they're also one of the oldest. Cnidarians have been around for a very, very long time. They might have been the earliest animals, the earliest animals to evolve that had sort of differentiated organs at the scale that we can actually see without a microscope. Now, I've got a few more questions. Where do invertebrates live? Lorraine asked this from Glen Oak Elementary. Very good question. Some invertebrates live everywhere. So things like worms, for example, things like arthropods, they figured out how to live on land and in the ocean. But other invertebrates only live in the ocean or only live in certain parts of the ocean. And the only place I believe that has virtually no invertebrates is the interior of Antarctica, which is so cold that there's not much of anything there. Now, there is one other group of invertebrates I wanted to talk about, and that's the group that our good friend the giant clam here belongs to. This group is called the mollusks. And I got just another question here. Was that a question, Dana? Oh, yeah. Let me see, but some other questions. I got one about sea stars a minute ago. Mason asked this. Very, very good question. What's the lifespan of a sea star? It depends on the kind of sea star. Some sea stars live really, really short lifespans, but the larger ones, especially a lot of the ones we have here at the aquarium, like bat stars and ochre stars and stuff, can live decades. But something like 20, 30 years. And also, a lot of them don't show signs of aging in a lot of the ways that other animals do. So many members of that same family, like urchins, can live even longer. Some urchins can live over 100 years, maybe even 200 years. But it's hard to measure because you have to follow them around their whole life. Now, one other question I got from Vivian, do clownfish share their home? Good question. So invertebrates and vertebrates sometimes have interesting relationships. Clownfish, like these folks right here, will live inside an anemone. This is one of the reasons why they're part of a family that's called the anemone fish. And they share their home, I guess you could say, with the anemone. Also, they do sometimes share it together. There'll be a pair that will nest in the same one. And another thing about clownfish, too, is that when they're not nesting, they oftentimes will live in the same anemones and kind of not bother each other. You can see there's 3 of them here. So good question, Vivian. Clownfish do get along pretty well, but when they're nesting, they get a little territorial. But as you can see, they get along pretty well in the anemone because they have a specialized covering on their skin that prevents the anemone from stinging them. And one other question, let's see here, from Natalie, can sea stars be out of water? I'm actually glad you asked this, because I said that echinoderms can't live on land, right? But I should have said they can't live on land permanently, and there's none that live out of the ocean all the time. But there are plenty of sea stars that can survive out of the water for some period of time because they live in tide pool environments. So let's say you're an ochre star, right, and you're hanging out on a rock, and maybe you don't quite notice that the tide's changing and the water all recedes away and you find yourself stuck to that rock. Well, that's not a big deal if you're an ochre star, because you can just sit there and hold on and wait a few hours until the tide comes back. And the ochre stars, by the way, are these orange and brown and purple and pinkish looking ones you see here. There's one there, there's another one there, another one there. They come in a lot of different colors, but they're all the same kind. And so that's a really good question, Natalie. So sea stars can be out of the water for, some sea stars, the ones that live in tide pool environments, can be out of the water for a while, but they won't last forever. They'll dry out if they don't get back in about the time it takes the tide to return. Now, we have a special guest, I believe, coming in. Now, I noticed today's program is about invertebrates, but we have a vertebrate visitor. In fact, we have two vertebrate visitors. We have Jimmy, who's going to be joining us in just a second. And also, I understand he's brought somebody with him. So let's have Jimmy come on in here, if we can clear some. Oh, I see. This is a larger operation than I thought. Hold on, everybody. Let's see here. Here comes Jimmy. Now, Jimmy is one of the folks in our husbandry department, and he takes care of lots of different animals here at the aquarium. Now, Jimmy, we can't see what animal you've got there, but what do you have?
Oh. This is Borrego. Kind of a funny name, but it's a female California desert tortoise. She is about 13 years old, and she loves to eat hibiscus flowers. These guys are herbivores, which means they eat plants and fruit. Normally, she would live around the areas near the Anza Borrego Desert State Park in Southern California near San Diego, and there she would eat cactus. You can eat the blooms, the fruit, or the cactus itself, and she likes hibiscus flowers. Let's see if she'll eat a little bit of it for you guys. No, she's not going to eat it right now.
Tortoises sometimes take their time with their decisions.
Now she's going to start eating it, but you guys can't see. Let's see if she'll do it. She's checking the flower out. Let's put it this way. But an interesting thing about these guys, a tortoise is pretty much a terrestrial or land-based animal, and then turtles are usually aquatic and living around or in the water. And speaking of water, she can go without drinking water for up to a year. They can retain that water in their bodies. And again, they do burrow with the claws that you see in the front, and they have this shell that's their permanent home, and they don't shed the shell. They can withdraw inside of it if they're startled or if they're trying to avoid maybe a predator or another animal. If you guys ever see one of these guys, don't approach them, because again, that water is pretty scarce, and if they lose that water, it'll be really difficult for them to find some more.
Well, that's just delightful. Borrego is a real performer. She's got a lot of character. You can see that she's really loves the camera.
Were you posing for everybody?
How old did you say Borrego is?
13. We have it in our records that she's 13, but these guys could possibly live up to 60 years.
60 years, wow. So Borrego might be here at the aquarium for quite some time.
Very long time. She's doing great. Now she's eating the flower. I think she likes the internal part of the flower the best. Let's try that. You want to eat that part? There you go. Munch, munch, munch.
There we are.
There we go.
Well, we've all successfully seen a tortoise eat. Thanks so much for joining us, Jimmy.
You're very welcome. Take care, you guys.
And Jimmy, by the way, is, as I was saying, one of our husbandry staff. And the husbandry staff are here at the aquarium taking care of the animals, even though we're closed, and are doing this every day, all the while trying to maintain social distancing to make sure that everybody stays safe and healthy. Wearing masks while they work in the exhibits and around the animals. And so it's an interesting time here at the aquarium, but if you want to learn more about what's been going on, again, check out all of our different social media feeds, our different programs like the Daily Bubble, like Online Academy here. And we're going to be trying to feature more stuff like what you just saw with Jimmy. And on our next program, let's see, with the 120 program, we got a Rosie Boa coming in, so that'll be exciting. Now, we had, I think, do we have any more questions? We don't? Well, while we're waiting for a few more questions, I'm going to talk about that last group of invertebrates that I wanted to discuss, because it's maybe my favorite. This group, again, is the mollusks. Now, Stewie started by showing us a picture of a clam. Now, you might say, well, what's so exciting, Luke, about clams? I mean, clams they kind of sit there, even the giant clam like this one, they don't got a lot going on, right? Well, mollusks are a very big and very, very, very diverse group. So some mollusks, like clams and oysters and mussels and stuff like that, yeah, they're not that exciting. They're kind of boring, I guess. There's other mollusks, though. There's mollusks like snails. Snails are another kind of mollusk. There's also another really interesting group of mollusks, and this one is my favorite. This group of mollusks is called the Cephalopods, and let's see an example of a cephalopod here. Does anyone know what this is? What is that? It is a cuttlefish. The cuttlefish is one type of cephalopod. So I mentioned the mollusks right there, things like snails and clams and stuff, generally pretty kind of slow-moving, not very intelligent animals. But there's one group of mollusks that has developed some of the most amazing adaptations that any animals have anywhere. And that group of mollusks is called the cephalopods. And it includes animals like this cuttlefish here, also animals like octopus, and also squid. And the cephalopods are so different from the other mollusks that sometimes it's hard to even realize that they are. But the reason why we can know, the kind of ways we can tell mollusks are all related is through really looking at their internal way that their body works and how their organs are structured and how their outer body is structured. But it's not as easy as it really is with the other groups, though. Because, some mollusks have shells, some don't. Some have some have eyes, like the cuttlefish ears, some don't. Mollusks are a really, really complex and diverse group. But the cephalopods are my personal favorite group inside that whole big, large group, because cephalopods really do have some characteristics that they all share. For one thing, suction cups. All the cephalopods, except for their real primitive cousin, the chambered nautilus, have these suction cups that allow them to grab onto things and manipulate objects in their environment. They also all have the ability to change color, or almost all of them do. Cephalopods, like the octopus and the squid and the cuttlefish, have these special cells in their skin called chromatophores. And chromatophores allow them to change their color to match almost anything, to blend in with practically anything around them. So it's an incredible adaptation, really impressive ability that is shared by almost all the cephalopods. And then finally, my other reason why I think cephalopods are so awesome has specifically to do with the octopus. The octopus, like this giant Pacific octopus here, is generally thought to be the most intelligent of all the invertebrates. Of all the animals outside the vertebrate family, that's again our family right as the vertebrates, of all the animals outside of that group, they're all generally not considered to be all that smart. The invertebrates in general, not the greatest thinkers in the world. But some invertebrates have managed to do incredible things. And one of the ones that's most intelligent when it comes to its ability to solve puzzles and come up with new ideas and get kind of creative with new objects and stuff like that is the octopus. Octopuses in aquariums and laboratories and even out in nature have been seen doing very, very clever things, camouflaging themselves in new ways, pretending to be different kinds of animals, pretending to be different kinds of objects. They've also learned how to use certain kinds of tools and things that people have introduced to them. For example, many of our octopuses over the years have learned to unscrew the lid of a bottle. If we put food on the inside, we can give them a jar with food in it, they'll unscrew the lid and get it out. Some octopuses will come up with new ways to use objects they find in the environment. For example, there's a great video, you can look this up on YouTube, of an octopus that found half of a coconut. And it was just using it as a house and just carrying it around as though it was a hermit crab. Ooh, what have we got here? Ooh, here's an octopus trying to solve a puzzle. This is our red octopus. There is some food in there, and as you can see, the octopus is exploring the thing and figured out how to pop it open. This is something that most of the animals in the aquarium could not do. Oh, look at them go. And the other great thing about this is oftentimes octopuses, once they figure out that, their food is hiding in something, will be like, oh, you know what, this also works as a house. They'll seal themselves up inside of it. So that's something great to see there. Now, we got another question about, this is one about mollusks. Someone asked, how do clams move? Well, some clams move hardly at all. But most of the members of that family that the clams belong to, that kind of group inside the mollusks, can move by basically rapidly opening and closing their shell and jetting water out of these things called siphons that are on the side, and they only have one of those. And some move more than others. Mussels basically never move. Clams move sometimes. Scallops, like the shell logo. Scallops actually move quite a bit, and they want to. Oysters can also move. but they do it in a real clumsy way because they're just literally like sort of flapping their shells and jetting water out of it. But good question. How do clams move? Maybe you didn't realize they do. They do. Now, it looks like we have run out of time, but I just want to remind everybody before we wrap up that it is Earth Day. So once again, if you want to spread the news, we're encouraging everybody to draw a picture of the Earth with hearts. And you can draw hearts, one heart, big heart, Earth inside a heart, whatever you like. And share that on social media, and please tag the aquarium because we want to see your picture, and we want to participate while we're all spreading the word about the wonderful things that our planet does. Again, it's been an interesting time in history, right? It's a rough time, but the fact of the matter is that the Earth is here for us through thick and thin, and this big blue marble we live on is the one thing that we really do need to take care of over everything that we have. It's the most important thing about, of course, that we've got because we live on it. It provides all the resources we need to survive. So Earth Day every year is a great opportunity for us to celebrate the Earth and remember the things we need to do to take care of it. And there's a special Earth Day this time, by the way, because it's the 50th anniversary. So share the love online, draw your own Earth heart picture, and let us know by tagging the aquarium. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll be doing another online academy in about an hour and a half at 1 o'clock. But it's been a lot of fun hanging out with you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.